This is the topic of our talk this evening. This graph is life expectancy in the United States. And you can see during the Civil War, not too good. During World War I and the Spanish flu pandemic, not too good. Those are the two big dips in life expectancy that show up on the graph. But as soon as antibiotics go into mass production, it's life expectancy gains every single year. Every generation has the expectation that they will live longer than their parents until 2018. For the first time since penicillin went into mass production, life expectancy in the United States has gone down. Why is that? We have wars, but not like civil wars, not like World War I. World War II didn't even dent life expectancy. It's not COVID because this data ends in 2018. Why is it that now Americans aren't living as long, or can't expect to live as long as they used to? Well, one of the answers is on this slide. These are the leading causes of death in the United States. Right at the top, heart disease, and after that, cancer, unintentional injuries, maybe it's a car accident, falling off a ladder, and then we have things like pneumonia, stroke, Alzheimer's, diabetes. This is what's killing people. What you don't see up there is like the classic infectious diseases, the things that used to kill people before penicillin. We have now these metabolic diseases and these genetic disorders that are killing people in the United States. Where do they come from? One of the key determinants of all of these of the majority of these leading causes of deaths is diet. So we're going to look at what Americans are eating. This is from the Department of Health and Human Services and the USDA. This is the latest of 8 editions of dietary guidelines for America. And a lot of this is going to look familiar. What does the Department of Health and Human Services say we should be eating? Dark green, red, and orange vegetables. You're having your salad right now. Congratulations. They say you should be eating beans and peas, fruits, and especially whole fruits, lots of grains. Does this sound familiar? Is this used to what you're hearing? Terrific. What comes after grains? Fat-free. Get your low-fat milk. That would be fine, including yogurt and cheese. And they do recommend fortified soy beverages, just like my grandmother used to titrate. They're recommending a variety of protein foods, including seafood, lean meats, not fat meats, poultry, eggs, more beans, nuts, seeds, and they want you to eat oils. Not the saturated fat oils, but the good oils, like soybean oil and safflower oil and canola oil. This is Department of Health and Human Services. They particularly say avoid saturated fats like butter, cream, beef fat, bacon. Avoid trans fats like margarine. Avoid the added sugars and avoid the sodium. All right, well, let's see how Americans are doing. Well, gosh, the Department of Health and Human Services has a scorecard. It measures what Americans eat. And it says, are Americans eating healthier than they used to eat? And by gum, they are. Here's 2000. This is about 20 years ago. And according to their scorecard, Americans were just below 50. There's no units on the scorecard. But we've improved. We've come in 10 years all the way up to 57.8. And if you believe the trend, we'd be getting even better. So here's the question. If Americans are eating healthier, why are they dying sooner? Perhaps it's the exercise, because the Department of Health and Human Services says it's also really important to meet these physical activity guidelines. And you haven't gone to the gym as much as you should. You're like, oh yeah, I should probably get my steps. Americans just aren't exercising enough. They're eating better, but they're dying because they're not exercising enough, right? Well, no, that's not what the data shows at all. 2008 is in blue, and 2013 is in orange. And this is just one graph published by the Department of Health and Human Services, but it's typical of the trends since the early 70s. Americans are exercising more. Every age group is exercising more and eating better. So if Americans are eating better and exercising more, why the hell are they dying of heart disease? Why are they having strokes? Why do they have type 2 diabetes? Why do they have Alzheimer's? Why do they have cardiovascular disease? Because the guidelines from the Department of Health and Human Services are not keeping Americans healthy. There are 2 books that are explaining this discrepancy between the improvement in Americans' adherence to the guidelines and the decline in their health. The first one is Ben Bikman, Why We Get Sick. He wrote a book about something called insulin resistance. There's diabetes, but before you get diabetes, insulin resistance. It's when your body has to produce more and more insulin just to handle the carbohydrates that you've eaten, just to keep your blood sugars under control. Insulin resistance is a precursor to type 2 diabetes. The other one is called The Big Fat Surprise. Now, Ben Bikman is a faculty member at Brigham Young. He's a professional researcher. Nina Teichholz is an investigative journalist. So she talked to a bunch of scientists and she went to the library. She's not a researcher. She wrote a book about the researchers. And her thing is, it's all about the saturated fats. Ben Bikman says carbs are killing you. Nina Teichholz says it's the unsaturated fats that are killing you. We're going to investigate both of these theses in this talk. We're going to look closer at insulin resistance and closer at saturated fat. So here's our journey. Insulin resistance as a predictor of age-related diseases. This paper is 20 years old, and it took a look at different these leading causes of death, and it took a look at something called the steady state plasma glucose. How high is your blood sugar? We know that blood sugar goes all over the place, but you're not necessarily diabetic, but your blood sugars can run high, which is typical of insulin resistance. Here's your steady state plasma glucose, and on the right, these are the people who are diabetic or pre-diabetic, and on the left, these are the people who have healthy insulin sensitivity, healthy blood glucose levels. This is the number of what they call clinical events. The people with the lowest steady state plasma glucose have the fewest heart attacks, the fewest strokes. They have the healthiest lives. And the people with the highest steady state plasma glucose, not necessarily diabetic, but some of them are, have the greatest rate of type 2 diabetes, the greatest rate of cancer, that's Ca is cancer, the greatest rate of cardiovascular disease, the greatest rate of heart disease. All of those events are listed on the leading causes of death. This is a correlation now between insulin resistance and what's killing Americans. It's not causation, but it sure is a powerful indictment of carbohydrates and the kind of disorder that would cause your blood glucose to go up. These are looking for confounding factors. They're saying, well, maybe the kind of people who have high steady state plasma glucose also have high cholesterol. So they look for that. No, they don't have high cholesterol. Cholesterol is irrelevant. They don't even have high LDL cholesterol. And the ones who had high HDL cholesterol had fewer events, not more. They were looking for other things like blood pressure. Blood pressure didn't matter. Triglycerides. Triglycerides register. When your triglycerides are high, it will shorten your life. So this study, which is epidemiological, looked at a lot of different people, said what's killing people is high blood sugar, not enough HDL in their bloodstream, too many triglycerides. That's going to come up some more. Here's another one. Hyperinsulinemia is when your body is producing too much insulin. Why does it produce too much insulin? Because your blood sugar is too high. Predicts coronary heart disease risk in healthy middle-aged men. This is a bunch of policemen in Finland. And they tracked them for several decades, and they have a lot of data on them, and they're like, okay, what kills Finnish policemen? The thing that kills Finnish policemen is hyperinsulinemia. This is survival curves. This is proportion without a major heart disease event. And so they've split them up into groups. These Q are quartiles, or approximation of those, quintiles, and the ones with the fewest heart disease events had the lowest blood sugars and the least insulin. The ones with the highest were the most insulin resistant. Those are the policemen whose bodies are producing as much insulin as it can crank out, and sure enough, insulin is related to heart disease. So we now have 2 studies, and the studies agree. We also have our experience. This is Buffy the Cat. And Buffy the Cat was morbidly obese not that long ago, around Christmas, last Christmas. Buffy has a playmate, Jack, and Jack couldn't walk anymore. So this is my friend AJK, and these are her cats. And because she was type 2 diabetic, this is her at 12% body fat. You can see her abs. She's 6'1", 122 pounds in this picture, and diabetic. Because she cured her type 2 diabetes by cutting carbs out of her diet and introducing deliberate cold exposure, she looked at her obese cats and she said, what am I feeding these cats? And the answer was cornmeal. It was they called it the premium food, but it was all full of carbohydrates. Now, have you ever seen a cat stalk down a corn on the cob? It doesn't make sense. Cats are obligate carnivores. They're supposed to eat rodents and birds and meat. She took her cats off of the regular pet food and put them on canned meat and fish. And this is what Buffy looks like now. Buffy lost 4 pounds. In other words, 25% of Buffy's body weight. What worked for AJK, what healed her type 2 diabetes, was going high protein, high fat, low carb. And when she tried that on her cats, she got the same and even more dramatic results. You don't have to be diabetic. You don't have to be obese to be diabetic. When you live on a diet of aspirin and Coke, this is what you get: diabetes and low body fat. She wrote an article about it. We posted it up on our website. What else do we know? The fastest way to fix your blood sugar is cold exposure. This is the business that Morozko forges in, and this is why I started getting interested in insulin resistance, because when you get into the cold, your body begins to burn all the glucose in your bloodstream. Well, how do we know this? Because they took a bunch of German guys. This is a group of middle-aged men in Germany, all of them type 2 diabetic. And they said, here's what we're gonna do. You're gonna spend 10 days hanging out. You can eat whatever you wanna eat. Don't want anybody exercise. It would just screw up our study. Watch TV. These are all 50-something, early 60-something men with type 2 diabetes. They said the only catch is you got to wear shorts and a t-shirt, and we're going to keep the room around 50 degrees. They're like, okay, I'll sign up for 2 hours a day, 50 degrees, whatever. 10 days later, their insulin sensitivities, every single one of them improved. And some of them went way the hell up. This is their glucose intake rate. How fast do they clear glucose out of their bloodstream and put it in their cells? 50 degrees for 2 hours. That's barely, we call that a tailgate party in the United States. And it fixed their type 2 diabetes. Okay, so maybe Ben Bickman is onto something, because insulin resistance will lead to 6 out of the 10 leading causes of death. And we can fix insulin resistance by getting carbs out of the diet and doing a little cold exposure. What about saturated fat? Department of Health and Human Services says avoid it, minimize it. If you're going to have those oils, eat the good oils like safflower and canola and soybean and corn oil, the ones that are either monounsaturated or polyunsaturated. Don't have the saturated fat. Well, this is a meta-analysis. A meta-analysis groups all the different studies that they can find in the library. This is just one study. This isn't just 300 patients. This is every single study ever published. They review to see whether the studies are compatible and comparable, and of the dozens that they collect, they say this is what we found. Epidemiology shows that there's no significant evidence for concluding that saturated fat is associated with a risk of heart disease or cardiovascular disease. Well, what the hell is that? Because all this time they've been telling us don't eat the bacon, trim the fat off, don't eat the skin on the chicken, trim your beef. And what this is saying is that isn't going to help your heart. It's not going to help your cardiovascular system. And that's the point in Nina's book. Let's look a little further. This is the latest stuff, 2020. Surely the people with COVID should not be eating bacon, right? I mean, we know that metabolic disorders are one of the significant comorbidities. And so somebody did a study and said, what about these people who are eating saturated fat? The more saturated fat you eat, the lower the COVID mortality among these people who contract a serious case of the disease. What does this graph say? Bacon treats COVID. Right? Like, I'm eating the skin on the chicken. Dietary saturated fat intake, risk of stroke. It's not just cardiovascular disease, it's not just heart disease. Stroke is when the blood no longer reaches your brain. What do we see here? The more saturated fat you eat, the less your risk of stroke. And it's not by a little. 20%, 15%, maybe more, maybe less. But when you get up to over 20 grams of fat a day, you've taken at least 10% off your risk of stroke. So what does that tell you? Bacon protects you against stroke. Butter is good for your brain. This is what we're drawing from the data. This isn't some made-up bureaucratic recommendation or report. This last one's hard to get at. Changes in serum cholesterol versus probability of death. This is all-cause mortality. This includes suicide. This includes accidental injury. And the scale is kind of negative. This is negative 80, negative 100. As cholesterol goes down, probability of death goes up. And it's hard to get your brain around that. So I reversed the scale. So it's the same exact data. I just flipped the scale around. This is now high cholesterol versus probability of death. What does this graph tell you? Cholesterol reduces your probability of death. The more cholesterol you have in your veins, in your blood, the less likely you are to die of any cause. The less likely traffic accidents, stroke, Alzheimer's. Cholesterol protects you against death. So what do they recommend instead of bacon? What do they recommend instead of whole milk and butter and cream in your coffee? Well, eat those seed oils. We call them vegetable oils, even though there's no vegetables in them. But corn oil, corn's not a vegetable. Corn's a grain. Soybean oil, soybean's a bean. Peanut oil, peanut's not a nut. It's a bean. None of these are vegetable oils. They're seed oils, and they are high in omega-6 and high in this thing called linoleic acid. They're low in saturated fat, and that's what's supposed to make them good. So in this study, they replaced the butter and the bacon and the beef fat. They replaced that with safflower oil, which is supposed to be one of the healthiest of the unsaturated oils. And they said, here's what we want to do. We're going to prevent heart disease among Australians by putting them on a low saturated fat diet. They're going to eat safflower oil instead of butter. And everybody was very proud of their study until they found out that the more safflower oil these people ate, the worse their health got. This is the cumulative death rate from all cause. The blue line up at the top is the intervention group, where they took the saturated fat out of the diet. And the red line is the control. All cause, cardiovascular disease, coronary heart disease. Every single study points to saturated fat being protective of health and the substitute oils, the seed oils, being detrimental to health. So where do we wind up? The Department of Health and Human Services and the Department of Agriculture tells you, eat more vegetables, eat fruits. Science says, if you like vegetables for the flavor, if you like fruit for the flavor, enjoy it. It will not protect you against heart disease. It will not protect you against any of the leading causes of death. The Health and Human Services says, eat more whole grains. The science says, get those carbs out of your diet because the carbs are killing you. Whether they're coming from fruit or from your bran muffin or from anywhere else, they say added sugar, they say reduce added sugar. What this is saying is all carbs are killing you. Get them out of your diet because that's what produces blood glucose. The Department of Health and Human Services says Eat seed oils instead of animal fats. What does the science say? Animal fats are good for you, and seed oils are toxic garbage. So what kind of changes do we make in our life? We got to make the same kinds of changes that AJK made with her cats. Take the cornmeal out. Take the grains out. Minimize the fruits. Keep the vegetables on the side just for the flavor. Take all of the high glycemic indexes, those things that spike your blood glucose, out of your diet. Take the seed oils out. Take the soybean oil out. And what should you be putting in? What should you eat more of if you want to lead a long, healthy life?
Bacon.
You got it. It's the bacon. It's the chicken skin. It's the beef fat.
Marbly
it's the
ribeye.
butter. That's right. And you know what's great about this? It tastes fantastic. So, Michael, I don't know what's on the menu for tonight, whether it's keto friendly or what.
How about the dessert?
I might nibble on the dessert. Yeah, because I'm not going to ruin the quality of my life in the service of some draconian diet restriction. My son was 6 years old. It was 2001 when he was diagnosed with diabetes. So he's been living with multiple insulin injections. Now he has a pump for almost 2 decades. And we have been exploring the relationship between diet and blood sugar since he was 6. He's now 26. I've learned a lot about Atkins and about blood glucose. I had no idea the lies that I had been told. And until I started measuring his blood glucose for myself with his meter, I probably never would have discovered half of this. I've met with his nutritionists who tell me that the data I've extracted from my son's body is wrong, impossible, and can't be right. And I stopped listening to the nutritionists. What do I do now? Anything the Department of Health and Human Services tells me to do, I start with the opposite, and I see if that works for me. Okay, thanks for listening.
Expand that thought to lots
Yeah,
of
yeah. I agree, Gary.